After making a cup of tea for each of them, the several beautiful female attendants bowed respectfully, then exited one after the other. Lu Muyen picked up the white porcelain celadon teacup and lifted its lid. A refreshing fragrance wafted out. There was a trace of spiritual force in the tea. It wasn't the lowest grade tea either. Ming Chamber of Commerce Alliance sure was generous. She took a sip and the scent of tea lingered in her mouth. It had been so long since she drank any spiritual tea. This tea was very much inferior to the spiritual tea Lu Muyen had tasted before, but she didn't dislike it at all. She was famous as a tea lover back in the spirit world one. This spiritual tea is pretty good. When the auction's over, I better ask to buy some from shopkeeper Lu. My grandpa loves this. Xiao Ziong exclaimed after taking a few more sips of spiritual tea. Lu Muyen smiled lightly and asked, this spiritual tea is also sold by the Ming Chamber of Commerce Alliance. The spiritual tea isn't sold publicly. But if you have some connections, then you could still obtain some. Yunlan's slender fingertips rubbed the celadon cup, then raised his eyes, if Muyen wants, then I can get some for you. Then thank you, cousin. Lu Muyen thanked him without restraint. She really liked this spiritual tea, so she'll remember this personal favor. We're a family, there's no need for formalities. Yunlan smiled and shook his head. His empress mother really loved Lu Muyen, even if she used to be known as the trash of the imperial capital and had an overbearing and dislikable personality. His empress mother never lessened her doting on Lu Muyen. Lu Muyen also remembered how her empress aunt truly did love her a lot, not to mention even though Yunlan wasn't close to her, he never bullied her, and instead, protected her even when he didn't want to. Such relatives were rare and precious, so she should become more familiar with him in the future. As the auction hadn't started yet, they chatted idly, but soon they heard a knock on the door. Yunlan gave the guard behind him a look, and the person walked over to open the private room door. There, a beautiful woman with a gentle temperament in a rose-red palace dress entered, bringing a few others. Amongst them were Gu Yanran and Zheng Rou. When the two saw Lu Muyen, they were surprised. Zheng Rou's dislike was written all over her face, while Gu Yanran concealed her resentment. They didn't expect this trash would be with the third prince and his group. They didn't dare to offend any of the people here, so they didn't ridicule Lu Muyen for the time being. When Lu Muyen saw the two of them, she fell into thought, but didn't say anything and only sat there quietly with her teacup. Brother third prince, brother fifth prince, fourth cousin, young Sir Xiao, young Sir Qi. When she saw Lu Muyen's, surprise flashed in her eyes, then she smiled at her and said, young Miss Lu. Seventh princess. Lu Muyen replied with a faint smile. The seventh princess was Imperial Noble Consort Hu's daughter, and was in the heaven class of the Empire Academy. They didn't have a lot of interactions, but neither did she bully her like Gu Yanran and her group did. In the palace, the seventh princess mother had a good relationship with Gu Yanran's elder sister, but she wouldn't offend the empress either. She was rather skillful in that aspect. Yunlan and the others smiled and nodded in greeting to 7th Princess Yun Xian. She usually knew how to conduct herself and none of them disliked her. Yun Xian also had her own private room, but after hearing that Yunlan and his group arrived, she brought Gu Yanran and the others over for a greeting. 3rd Prince, 5th Prince Gu Yanran and Zheng Rou also stepped forward to greet the rest, but they both ignored Lu Muyen. Lu Muyen didn't care either. She was indifferent without any ripples of emotion in her eyes. Yi Xian, you also came to participate in the auction. Gu Yanran smiled softly. Her voice was smooth like water, and she looked at Qi Yi Xian lovingly. Qi Yi Xian furrowed his brow subconsciously. In the past, he wasn't as disgusted by Gu Yanran's fake tenderness, but for some reason, he disliked it today. He nodded coldly, yes. Gu Yanran froze, and a sourness rose in her heart. When she entered just now and saw Lu Muyen here, she already felt uncomfortable. Why should this trash be here? Right, was only because she was born lucky. If she didn't have the general's mansion, then this trash wouldn't have been anything. She could step on her all she wanted. Yun Xian felt Gu Yanran's mood fluctuate, and even had a feeling of resentment. She was a little disappointed inside. Compared with Imperial Noble Consort Gu Yanran's schemes were lacking too much. Even compared with the current Lu Muyen, her tolerance was lacking too. With Zheng Rao's status, she wouldn't have been able to participate in such an auction. She was only able to participate because of her relationship with Gu Yanran, and because she gifted the princess a valuable present and asked to be given a chance. So she could only glare at Lu Muyen and say nothing. The auction is about to start. I'll return to my private room now. Yun Xian really couldn't stand Zheng Rou being this way, and she regretted agreeing to bring her. She liked Lu Mu Bai, so she didn't want to become enemies with Lu Muyen. To prevent any conflict, it was best to leave. Sure, you may go. Yunlan also didn't like Gu Yanran and Zheng Rou, so he simply nodded. Gu Yanran endured the grievances in her heart and looked at Qi Yi Xian affectionately, hoping that he could allow her to remain. She didn't want Lu Muyen and Qi Yi Xian to remain alone together, but her beloved appeared to not even see her amorous gaze, only looking down, staring at the tea set. Let's go. Yun Xian furrowed her eyebrows and warned Gu Yanran with her eyes. This wasn't the time to express love at all. This woman's brain was becoming more and more useless. As expected from the schemes of someone who came from a small, lowly family. A thin mist rose in Gu Yanran's eyes. Seeing that Qi Yi Xian still had no intention of letting her stay, she could only stomp her foot, endure the grievance, and leave with the 7th princess. She looked like a tearful flower. Yi Xian, your little wife's full of grievance, aren't you going to chase after her and comfort her? Or bring her back and sit for a bit? Yun Jin smiled and joked as if he feared there wasn't enough chaos in the world too. Qi Yixian didn't say a word, but he looked up coldly at Yun Jin, an evident look of displeasure. Seeing Qi Yixian's cold face, Yun Jin shrugged, then glanced at Lu Muyen, who had been indifferent this entire time with only a slight curve of interest on her lips. Qi Yixian also looked at Lu Muyen in his peripheral vision and saw that she was drinking tea leisurely without any response. He suddenly felt sour, but he quickly adjusted his emotions. Except, he felt an inexplicable resentment towards Gu Yanran. He allowed his family to arrange her as his concubine because she was obedient, but seeing how restless and impure she was now, he suddenly felt that he needed to carefully consider whether or not to marry this woman in as a decoration. 3. Translated product by Mayar. When the auction was about to begin, there was a knock on the door to their private room. Yunlan frowned unconsciously and the guard standing behind him immediately opened the door. Shopkeeper Lu entered with the 7th princess and her company and said with a smile, "Third prince, just now a very distinguished guest came to participate in the auction, but he wanted his own private room. The superiors of the imperial family decided that the private room for the 7th princess was to be made available, so is it possible for the princess and her company to share this private room with you?" Shopkeeper Lu had no other choice. He couldn't defend that distinguished guest, and 5 of the private rooms for distinguished guests were booked by the royal family, so he could only go and negotiate with them. Their answer was to give the private room of the 7th princess to that distinguished guest, so he had to come forward to coordinate. Who is this very distinguished guest? Yun Luo asked aloud what everyone wondered. Shopkeeper Lu thought for a while and said, "A sword monarch expert. As for the rest, please forgive this one for being unable to answer." Solemnity filled the room, and they didn't ask any more. After they agreed, Shopkeeper Lu asked the attendants to add a few more chairs. As the private room was designed to be relatively large, adding a few more seats for the 7th princess and her company didn't make it feel any more crowded. "Sorry to bother, brother third prince." Yun Xian managed to smile. She felt very uncomfortable about the situation, but that person wasn't someone she could offend, so she could only bear it. Yunlan smiled softly and shook his head, saying, "No matter. Adding a few more people was nothing." Yun Xian took Gu Yanran, Zheng Ro and 2 other women to sit down, then the auction officially started. On the auction stage, an elegant middle-aged man entered with a gentle smile. "Today is the triennial auction. I am Ni Jun, today's auctioneer. Everyone knows the credibility of our alliance, and I believe that the auction this time won't disappoint everyone either." Ni Jun paused, then continued, "Today the auction also deliberately added 3 finale items, all of which are rare and of the finest quality. So everyone must seize the opportunity." Seeing that most of the people below displayed looks of anticipation and excitement, he said with a smile, "I presume everyone can't wait any longer, so I won't say any more. Let the auction officially begin now. Let's auction the first item." Ni Jun clapped his hands, and a young woman walked out holding a tray with a jade slip on it. This is a mortal rank top-grade manual suitable for wind attribute sword masters. Cultivating this technique can not only enhance the power of wind-based sword skills, but also build a defensive wall that could attack and defend, which is very rare. The auctioneer smiled, and after the introduction, he began to guide the people below to bid. It starts at 100,000 ink gold coins. The manuals on this land were divided into mortal rank, earth rank, sky rank, saint rank and divine rank. Each rank was divided into 3 grades, top grade, middle grade and low grade. The mortal rank top grade manuals were vied for eagerly by Sword King stage sword masters and below. Good manuals couldn't always be bought with money, and sometimes it was even impossible to find them, so being able to auction manuals was also a demonstration of the Ming Alliance of Merchants' vast resources. Lu Muyen wasn't interested in this manual, however. Even if a sky rank manual was presented to her, she wouldn't necessarily be interested. In her previous life, when she trained in her sect and explored numerous secret realms, she obtained many copies of manuals that would make numerous cultivators crazy. Now, those manuals still existed in her sea of consciousness, and was also a valuable asset. She was still going to practice the manuals from her precious life, as they weren't only the most suitable for her, but it also prevented her from taking a lot of detours. Lu Muyen was calm, but Gu Yanran couldn't remain calm. She was a sword master with the wind attribute, and the best manual in the Gu clan was mortal rank middle grade. A fire of desire burned in her eyes, and she clenched her fists. She must obtain this manual. 500,000. When the price for the manual reached 350,000, Gu Yanran directly raised the price. Gu Yanran's clan was the richest clan in the empire, so she had strong financial strength. Even the Lu clan couldn't compare, but the Lu clan's true worth was something that the Gu clan couldn't compare to. That's why even though imperial noble consort Gu was very arrogant in the palace, she couldn't supersede the empress. This time, as Gu Yanran participated in the auction, the Gu clan gave her 8 million ink gold coins. Even the core children and juniors of old distinguished clans of the empire couldn't take out this figure of money. It was enough for her to be proud of. Yunlan casually glanced at the excited and proud Gu Yanran. His eyes darkened and looked at Lu Muyen. "Does Muyen not want this manual? I remember you also cultivated wind attribute skills. If you like it, I'll bid for it and gift it to you." Lu Muyen was taken aback for a moment, then her heart warmed, and she glanced at Gu Yanran in her peripheral vision, whose expression immediately changed. She shook her head, uninterested. "Thank you, cousin, but there's no need. I'm not interested." She wasn't so bored as to act on impulse and contend for this manual with Gu Yanran, wasting Yunlan's ink gold coins. Gu Yanran felt relieved when she heard Lu Muyen wasn't interested, but she also felt unpleasant. Why did it feel like she was picking up an insignificant manual that the trash didn't want? A vicious look crossed her eyes after the Academy's grand competition. She would definitely step on Lu Muyen. In the end, the wind attribute skill was bought by Gu Yan ran with the price of 3 million ink gold coins. After that, 6 or 7 more items were auctioned one after another, but Lu Muyen wasn't interested in any of them, and not a single person bid for them in the private room. It wasn't until the auctioneer unveiled a piece of red cloth, revealing a small, dark cyan cauldron did she straightened up in her seat, her eyes bright. This is a cauldron left behind by a senior grade 4 alchemist, and this cauldron is a high-quality spirit tool. It could withstand the internal fire of a sword monarch stage expert and could even increase the pill rate. I believe everyone understands how valuable it is for alchemists without me saying any more. Though Ni Jun saw that most people revealed uninterested expressions, he didn't mind. Alchemists were originally very rare professions, and it would be useless for anyone else to buy this cauldron. Lu Muyen discovered that the auctions held by the Ming Alliance of Merchants were indeed very high class. Then she discovered that she was rather poor. The 1 million ink gold coins given by Yi Qing Han plus the money from the Lu clan was only 3 million ink gold coins altogether. If she couldn't afford this, then she'd have to buy the cauldron by selling some of her things. 3 million. Lu Muyen was too lazy to bid slowly, so she directly reported all her money. Pu. Yun Jin couldn't stop himself from spitting out his spiritual tea, lifted his head and said, Lu Muyen. You're ruthless. Even a prodigal wouldn't waste money like this. What was a sword master buying an unusable cauldron for? And the very first bid was 3 million ink gold coins. Was the Lu clan this rich? Why didn't he know? Lu Muyen, you're deliberately punishing me, right? Xiao Xiang was just about to bid 500,000 when Lu Muyen beat him to it. He was really gloomy. What's all this about? Lu Muyen rolled her eyes at Xiao Xiang. What am I doing punishing you? I've got no bones to pick with you at all. I really just want to get this cauldron. Then I'm sorry, this cauldron is also very useful to me. Xiao Xiang shrugged, then bid 3,500,000. Lu Muyen knew it would be like this. This cyan cauldron was very tempting to alchemists. But she didn't have a cauldron that was convenient for her to use right now, and this cauldron just met her requirements, so she could only bleed heavily. One. After Xiao Xiang announced his bid, everyone in the private room casted their gaze to Lu Muyen. Seeing Lu Muyen's determined, thoughtful gaze, Yunlan lowered his gaze, then looked up and asked, Muyen likes this cauldron? Yep. Lu Muyen nodded and hid the emotions in her eyes. Then I'll buy it and gift it to you. He never seemed to have gifted Lu Muyen anything, and since it was rare that she wanted something other than Qi Yi Xian, he decided to buy it for her. Lu Muyen's eyes revealed slight surprise. She didn't think her cousin would be this generous, but seeing sincerity, she made a decision in her heart. Sure. Then I won't be polite. 3,600,000. Yunlan nodded with a smile and joined the bid. 4 million. Someone in the next room called. Xiao Xiang glared at Yunlan. Trust you to discard your humanity for the opposite sex one. I remember that your master gifted you a cauldron that's higher in grade than this one. Yunlan raised his eyebrows. Don't think I don't know your hobby of collecting cauldrons. This cauldron is more important to Muyen, so naturally I'll choose her first. How'd you know this cauldron is more important to her? Xiao Xiang rolled his eyes. She only just managed to eradicate her terminal meridian's constitution. Constitution. Don't tell me she became an alchemist in such a short amount of time. I believe in my cousin. Yunlan played with the teacup in his hand and continued to bid, 4,500,000. Xiao Xiang held his forehead. He didn't have a strong desire for this cauldron and did indeed only want to buy it for his collection. After all, this was a cauldron once used by that particular high-level alchemist. But seeing that Yunlan definitely wouldn't stop until he bought the cauldron, he also gave up. Lu Muyen. Xiao Xiang tapped Lu Muyen's arm with a look of a child's curiosity. As long as you tell me how you eradicated your terminal meridian's constitution, then I won't bid against you. How about that? Lu Muyen looked at him in amusement. It's not like I'm paying for it, do whatever you want. She already caught Xiao Xiang's expression that revealed he wanted to give up the bidding, but now he wanted to elicit an answer from her? He was too young. Xiao Xiang choked, then pouted in annoyance, but he still stopped bidding. 5 million. The person in the next room called out another figure. 5,500,000. Yunlan continued to increase the price, his expression unchanged. 6 million. The other party continued. Yun Luo knew that Yunlan still wanted to buy other things today, and he probably only brought around 20 million ink gold coins. If he used a third of it or even more for this cauldron, it was possible he would miss the other things he wanted. He couldn't help but remind him, this price already exceeded the value of the cauldron, I think that's enough. Yunlan did want to buy other things, but he was one to keep his promises, so he wouldn't lose Lu Muyen's faith. If he missed the item he wanted, then it only meant they weren't fated. No need, he probably reached his baseline now. 6,100,000. Yunlan increased the price. As Yunlan expected, the person in the private room next to them stopped bidding after hearing the price. Lu Muyen felt warm seeing Yunlan continue to bid for the cauldron without hesitation. In fact, she could see that Yunlan did doubt her purpose of buying the cauldron, but he still supported her unconditionally. Regardless of why he trusted her, she would acknowledge this cousin. Seeing Lu Muyen's ecstatic appearance, Yun Luo sighed inwardly. He thought that she had changed, but he was afraid she probably only wanted to buy this cauldron to attract Qi Yi Xian's attention. Gu Yan ran and Zheng Ro exchanged looks and saw jealousy in each other's eyes. Why did this trash have this much luck? She didn't have money and yet she still had someone rush to help her. Why? However, the two soon summed it up to family after all. The empress loved the trash dearly, so it made sense that the third prince would be this generous to Lu Muyen. Although Yun Xian was surprised why her third brother, who was kind on the surface but cold on the inside, would regard Lu Muyen so favorably, but she still kept the gentle smile on her face as she did from the beginning. Qi Yixian frowned and glanced at Lu Muyen in disapproval. It seemed she returned to her nature, still so willful. Yun Jin simply had the mentality to watch a good show. He felt that Lu Muyen would shock them once again. After a few more items were auctioned off, some people in their private room began to bid as well. Qi Yixian, Yun Luo and the seventh princess each took one item, and the price reached over 10 million ink gold coins each. Another few auctions later, Ni Jun took a palm-sized shield from his attendant and his eyes unconsciously revealed some excitement. This shield was created by the Great Master Yan and is a P-quality spirit tool. Wow! An uproar stirred from the people below when they heard Great Master Yan's name. Who was Great Master Yan? He was one of Tianling continent's greatest high-level smiths, and once refined a saint treasure that even sword sovereign stage experts vied for in bloody battles. But it was unfortunate that after Great Master Yan entered a secret realm, he never returned. Whether he was alive or dead was uncertain, but many guessed that he was probably dead, which was a pity. Lu Muyen didn't pay attention to the excitement of the people around her. She focused her attention on the small yellow shield. There's something suspicious. That was her first feeling, so she spread her spiritual sense and tentatively slipped into the shield. The moment she touched the small shield, a roar from a vicious beast entered her brain and confronted her spiritual sense. If it weren't that her mental energy was very strong, this sound would definitely cause an internal injury. Ni Jun gestured for everyone to silence, and the people in the audience immediately hushed, all staring at the palm-sized shield fervently. Since this shield was made by Great Master Yan, then its value should belong in the category of the finale items, right? To auction it now, does it possibly have any defects? A hoarse, aged voice questioned from a private room opposite Lu Muyen and her companies. It's that sword monarch expert. Yun Xian couldn't help but say. That was the private room she was in before. As expected from a professional auctioneer, Ni Jun not only didn't feel any dissatisfaction from their questioning, but also took the opportunity to say what he originally wanted to say. This distinguished guest is right. Although this shield is a P-quality spirit tool created by Great Master Yan, but it does have a defect, and it's that you couldn't use your elemental energy to control its size and confront the enemy. While Ni Jun spoke, he channeled some of his elemental energy into the small shield. It spun around in his hand, then a yellow light instantly enveloped the shield. Just when everyone waited for it to display its power, there was no longer any reactions. This shield has also been tried by several Sword King appraisers from our Ming Alliance of Merchants, but it was the same response as this. Ni Jun retrieved his elemental energy, and the shield returned its original appearance. Therefore, several appraisers from our Ming Alliance of Merchants agreed that it was only suitable for a fated person. If that person could control this shield, then its defense could definitely withstand one blow from a sword monarch expert. Lu Muyan's lips curled slightly. Suitable for a fated person? Those Sword King appraisers probably didn't even discover the soul of a vicious beast hidden within the small shield. One popular Chinese colloquial saying. As soon as Ni Jun's words fell, the excitement of many were extinguished. What was the use of obtaining a P-quality spirit tool shield, but it wouldn't be used? Were they looking to abuse themselves? According to you, then it's useless for us to buy this shield. They wouldn't believe nonsense like it was only suitable for a fated one. They only believed that this shield was faulty. That's right. Then can we try whether we can use it before we buy it? If we can use it, then we'd buy it. Some people still held a great desire for this shield, so they wanted to try. Following, a series of doubts sounded from the seats, and there were also some who didn't want to give up and give the shield a try. If they could control it, then they'd buy it. Ni Jun seemed to have expected such a situation, so he said without rush, letting those who want to buy it to try to use it was definitely impossible. This shield's value is indeed very high, and it's also true you would have to risk the possibility of being unable to use it. Whether you buy it or not is your choice, but our Ming Alliance of Merchants wouldn't joke with our reputation. This shield was entrusted to them for auction by a regular client of theirs and he didn't allow potential buyers to test it. Besides, if someone decided to buy this shield, then they should bear the unforeseen risks. After all, it was a fortuitous opportunity if they bought it and could use it. Due to the strength of the Ming Alliance of Merchants, even though Ni Jun's words made some people unsatisfied, but no one dared provoke him. The result would only be death. The value of this shield depends on what you personally feel it's worth. Well, start the bid now. The starting price is 500,000 ink gold coins. Ni Jun quoted the minimum price. If this shield didn't have the defect, then the starting price definitely wouldn't be lower than 3 million ink gold coins. 600,000. 900,000. Regardless, it was still a P-quality defense-type spirit tool, not to mention it was made by Great Master Yan, so many still participated in the bidding, but they had their individual baselines. If it exceeded it, then they'd stop. To them, it felt like food that was tasteless, yet was a pity to discard one. When the price reached 9 million, Lu Muyen saw Yunlan hesitating, tapping his finger on the table gently. She looked up and said, "Cousin, this shield is definitely worth it." Lu Muyen, such a defective product isn't even worth spending 10 million ink gold coins or more. There's still spirit tools to bid for later, Alan can definitely choose a more practical one. Seeing Lu Muyen instigate Yunlan, Yun Luo frowned in displeasure, but his tone was still considered tactful. Lu Muyan's eyes overflowed with brightness. She didn't answer Yun Luo, but instead chuckled and turned to Yun Lan. Cousin, you need to believe in your instincts. Yun Lan was a little hesitant at first. He leaned towards buying the shield as that shield gave him a mysterious feeling, but what Yun Luo said was also the truth. That's why he was tossing between to bid or not to bid. Now that he heard Lu Muyan's words, he suddenly became enlightened and bid, 10 million. Yun Lan, I say your head's full of water today too. Yun Luo said with a little displeasure. Yun Lan was just unreasonable today, constantly accompanying Lu Muyan in her craziness. Yun Lan smiled helplessly. He knew that his cousin was doing this for his own good. But he also didn't know why. When he saw Lu Muyan radiate such self-confidence, he also inexplicably wanted to believe in her. 12 million. A voice rang from another private room. 13 million. Yun Lan followed. 14 million. The other party still didn't give up. 15 million. This was all the ink gold coins Yun Lan had on him today, but luckily, the other party stopped after hearing the price. In the end, Yun Lan won the bid for this shield for 15 million ink gold coins. Qi Yixian and Xiao Ziyang both revealed a disapproval look, but since it was Yun Lan's choice, they didn't say anything. However, their understanding of Lu Muyan's willfulness increased another layer. Yun Jin had the opposite reaction to the others, however. He smiled merrily at Lu Muyan and asked, there's something suspicious about this shield? Smart. Lu Muyan was rather surprised Yun Jin actually believed her as well. She was in a good mood, which was rare, as she nodded. What's suspicious about it? Let's hear it. Yun Jin continued to ask. You'll know in a bit. Lu Muyan was too lazy to explain. Besides, when the people from the Ming Alliance of Merchants arrived with the shield, they'd know. The corner of Yun Jin's lips twitched. But he realized had to know the answer soon, so he didn't pursue it. Ridicule flashed in Gu Yanran's eyes as she took delight in her coming misfortune as if she'd believed that there was anything suspicious about the shield. This was no doubt all a ruse to show something to Qi Yixian. It was just that this stupid woman didn't know that Yixian didn't like this sort of sloppy behavior. Zheng Rou snorted, but when she saw Yun Lan cast a cold look at her, her smile quickly vanished and her hatred for Lu Muyan increased. Yun Luo and Xiao Ziyang glanced at each other. They didn't believe in Lu Muyan's words and only hoped Yun Lan would learn his lesson after this and stop spoiling his trash cousin unscrupulously. Lu Muyan saw everyone's expressions, but she didn't care. She only ever cared about people she valued, and the rest were nothing to her. When she glanced over to Yun Xian, she saw a gentle a sliver of interest rose in her eyes. This woman's scheming sure was deep. She didn't display either happiness or anger. As expected from a princess raised by the imperial family. After a while, a knock sounded on the door. The auction items of the Ming Alliance of Merchants were all inspected and paid for on-site with their crystal cards. One auction was divided into several rounds, and after one round, the auctioneer will announce a break of a quarter of an hour, then after the transactions of the items, they'd continue the next round. The person who sent the shield over was shopkeeper Lu. Towards every superior in the imperial family of every kingdom, the Ming Alliance of Merchants would all have secret ways of cooperation and contacts. Knowing Yun Lan was Yanzhou Kingdom's emperor's favorite son, he naturally caught the attention of the person in charge of the alliance in Yanzhou Kingdom. Third Prince, this is the spirit tool you won, please inspect it. Shopkeeper Lu took the tray from an attendant behind him and handed it to Yun Lan. Yun Lan nodded with a smile. We've troubled shopkeeper Lu to come in person. When saying that, he reached out and took the palm-sized shield from the tray. After channeling some elemental energy into it, the shield's reaction was the same as the demonstration by Nai Jun. Only a layer of light yellow light surrounded the shield and there was no other response. Upon seeing this, shopkeeper Lu smiled helplessly and reminded, the shield was identified as a P-quality spirit tool precisely because it couldn't be controlled. If the third prince could discover how to control it in private, then its level wouldn't simply be a spirit tool. These kinds of auction items were just like that. It depended on luck. If one couldn't find a way to control it, then it would just be a burden. But if one did find a way, then its value was definitely several times higher, perhaps dozens of times higher than the auction price. No worries. I can still bear this risk. Yun Lan's expression remained unchanged. He always felt that this shield wasn't that simple. After the auction was over, he could carefully examine it. Lu Muyan, didn't you say that the shield was suspicious, so you got the third prince to win it? Zheng Rou jumped out after receiving Gu Yanran's look. Now that the third prince couldn't use this shield, then I trust you have a solution. After she said that, everyone cast their gazes onto Lu Muyan. Coldness flashed in Yun Lan's eyes. He saw Gu Yanran and Zheng Rou exchange glances just now. The Gu clan had become more arrogant because the imperial noble consort gained favor, while Zheng Rou dared to be so presumptuous. Their education was definitely horrible. It seemed that it was time for the Zheng clan to change their head of the family. Translated product by Mayor. Seeing the chill hidden in Yun Lan's eyes, Lu Muyan knew that he was very dissatisfied with Zheng Rou and Gu Yanran's provocation. Even if he couldn't use this shield, but he didn't blame her, that was enough for her to act. Cousin, show me the shield. Yun Lan nodded and handed the small shield over to Lu Muyan. In order to not burden her, he added, let everything flow with fate, there's no need to mind. Lu Muyan smiled silently as she took the small shield in her hands. The mental energy she released earlier was still attached to the small shield and was confronting the soul of the vicious beast. Yun Luo and the others stared at Lu Muyan to see what tricks she could play. Even shopkeeper Lu didn't leave immediately after swiping the crystal card, and instead waited with curiosity in his eyes. Noticing the power of the vicious beast's soul weakening slowly under her suppression, a sharp glint flashed in her eyes. She raised her left hand and began to draw with 2 fingers above the shield, and traces of spiritual energy flowed with her movements like moving clouds and flowing water, constructing a talisman that flashed with a white fluorescent light hovering in the air. Suppress. As Lu Muyan's voice fell, the talisman drawn with spiritual energy instantly dashed down and entered the small shield in her hand. Drawing talismans in the void. Shopkeeper Lu couldn't help but exclaim with his eyes wide open. Then he realized he lost his composure, coughed to cover it up, but the shock that filled his heart hardly lessened. Drawing talismans in the void was something that could only be performed by Sword King experts that had slightly touched upon the laws of heaven and earth, so when it was performed by Lu Muyan, who was only at the Great Sword Master stage, he couldn't help but lose himself. Hearing shopkeeper Lu's exclamation, apart from Gu Yan, Ran and Zheng Rou, who didn't know about drawing talismans in the void, the rest looked at Lu Muyan in utter shock. Lu Muyan wasn't distracted because of shopkeeper Lu's loss of composure. She continued to chant a few more sentences, and characters that contained spiritual energy exited her mouth, but this, no one saw. After a while, the small shield in her hand suddenly shone brightly, and then a dazzling yellow light burst out. When the blinding light dissipated, the small shield flew out of her hand and hovered in midair in the private room, then enlarged itself from the size of a palm, eventually stopping when it reached half the size of a person. Cousin, try again. Lu Muyan waved, and the yellow shield obediently returned to her hand, returning to the size of her palm. Yunlan forced the shock in his eyes down and took the shield. Then he channeled some elemental energy into it and discovered that he could actually connect with the shield. His lips curled up, threw it up gently, and with a thought, the shield immediately flashed a layer of bright light and enlarged. Spirit treasure. Yun Luo exclaimed. Shopkeeper Lu looked at the shield that Yunlan controlled at will and narrowed his eyes, then laughed out loudly. Congratulations to the third prince. This shield was previously identified as a P-quality spirit tool, and if one could control it, then it could potentially increase a quality, but who knew that this shield would skip peerless quality and advance straight into a low-quality spirit treasure? Its value is 100 times your bid. It was indeed a bargain. Yunlan's face also showed a rare look of delight. He also didn't think that this small shield would be a spirit treasure. In the entire Yanzhou kingdom, those who had spirit treasures could be counted on 10 fingers, and they were all high-stage experts. Why wouldn't he be happy to be fated to obtain something like this? Lu Muyan returned to her seat without any ripples in her eyes, as if this was a trivial matter and that she had long known this would be the result. When she released her mental energy to suppress the beast's soul earlier, she discovered that this shield was a spirit treasure. Magic tools were divided into spirit tools, spirit treasures, saint tool, saint treasure, divine tool and divine treasure. Each level was also divided into low quality, middle quality, high quality, peak quality, and peerless quality. When Yunlan saw Lu Muyan sitting calmly in her seat sipping her tea, he could only cite his cousin of his was more composed and graceful than any of the others present. He cast a grateful look and Lu Muyan returned it with a smile. Lu Muyan, how did you know that there was something suspicious about this shield? Xiao Ziong discovered that Lu Muyan had kept him on the edge of his seat so many times today, but he didn't feel good if he didn't ask questions. Shopkeeper Lu rubbed the jadeite thumb ring he wore and said with a mysterious smile, this old man is also very curious about how young Miss Lu could control this shield at will. Can young Miss Lu satisfy our curiosity? Then he added, of course, if it is inconvenient, then young Miss Lu could regard it as if this old man did not ask. Lu Muyan took a sip of tea and looked down at it. The tea water was golden, rich, and clear, and a rich tea fragrance lingered around her nose. Then she raised her eyes and asked instead, Shopkeeper Lu, does the Ming Alliance of Merchants sell this season's high-quality spiritual tea? Naturally we do. If young Miss Lu wants to buy, then this old man can apply for some. Shopkeeper Lu halted, then followed her words. It was only a little bit of spiritual tea, he could still make the decision. Lu Muyan, you ignored me again. Xiao Ziong tugged at Lu Muyan's sleeve, annoyed. Only when he realized her eyebrows wrinkled together lightly did he immediately let go. Lu Muyan realized that Xiao Ziong's character was really the simpler one amongst the few black-bellied men here. She rolled her eyes at him, then answered, truth is, there's a soul of a vicious beast sealed inside this defensive shield. If you couldn't suppress it, then you naturally wouldn't be able to control this spirit treasure. So that's how it is. Shopkeeper Lu nodded thoughtfully. Although he was curious about how Lu Muyan knew about the beast soul sealed within the shield, but that involved another person's secrets, so he resisted asking. Then how do you know that there's a vicious beast soul in the shield? Yun Luo discovered that he had completely misunderstood Lu Muyan. How was she a good-for-nothing trash? She could even draw talismans in the void. She sure hid her talents well. Did you use the talisman you drew in the void to suppress the beast soul? Regarding how I knew there was a vicious beast soul in the shield, forgive me for being unable to tell. Lu Muyan raised her eyebrows with a smile. She wouldn't reveal her exceptional mental energy. As for the spirit talisman, of course it was used to suppress the beast soul. Humph, pretending to be mysterious. Zheng Rou clenched her hands. How could this trash really discover the secret of this shield? Impossible. It must be like a blind cat finding a dead mouse too. She unconsciously snorted out loud when she thought that. A sliver of jealousy flashed in Gu Yanran's eyes. She originally planned to see Lu Muyan make a fool of herself, but who knew the trash suddenly became so powerful. She felt a little uneasy about the Academy's grand competition coming up soon. Seeing Zheng Rou come out to teach Lu Muyan a lesson, the corners of her lips rose. Impudent, who allowed you to interrupt? Zheng Ro, a big-breasted woman with no brains, was exceptionally annoying. After Yunlan's reproach, he ordered the guards behind him, throw her out. Yes. The two guards were also very disgusted with Zheng Rao's behavior. Young Miss Lu helped their master obtain a spirit treasure, yet this woman dared to ridicule. She was truly courting death. The two immediately stepped up and dragged her out. It was then that Zheng Ro realized she had lost her composure. This was mainly due to being so used to acting arrogant in front of Lu Mu Yen that she reflexively scoffed at her. She didn't expect to have caused trouble today. Third prince, I didn't mean it, can you please forgive me? When Zheng Ro was dragged to the door, she exerted her strength in an attempt to get rid of the restraints of the two guards and turned her head to beg Yunlan coquettishly. If she was really thrown out of here today, not only would she lose face, but the Zheng clan would also completely lose face, and by the time she returned, she'd be in trouble. Yunlan waved his hand impatiently and signaled to the guards to hurry up. Shopkeeper Lu also instructed the attendants next to him, in the future, this young miss of the Zheng clan is not allowed to enter any shops of the Ming Alliance of Merchants for trade, nor is she allowed to participate in auctions. Yes. No, I don't want that. Zheng Ro panicked when she heard the words of shopkeeper Lu. Suddenly remembering someone, she immediately yelled out to Qi Yi Xian, cousin, save me.